Welcome to the enabling aviation, advanced aviation mobility innovation district session. So we're going to do a shift from this morning. This morning we've been talking about advanced air mobility. We're going to move to how to enable advanced air mobility with innovation districts. And Director of Caltrans, Tony Tavares, gave us a good transition point for this shift because he was talking about the drones, but now we've got to have the Central Coast Advanced Air Mobility Innovation District. So that's the topic for the conversation. And I just wanted to ask you, how many of you know why Silicon Valley succeeded while Route 128 in Massachusetts didn't do so well? So that's the kind of question we're going to answer today, but in the context of advanced air mobility. How does the Central Coast become the Silicon Valley of advanced air mobility? With that, we have a terrific panel today for us. You can read their backgrounds on the website, but I'd like to introduce, on my right, Daniel Plaisance, Advanced Air Mobility Portfolio Lead for the Tulsa Innovation Lab. Very exciting, the work that he's done, and he's going to share his insights. He's worked with advanced air mobility among 3 other innovation districts. Also, with us today, sitting further on to my right is Chris Bley, and Chris is CEO of Airspace Integration and Insight Up Solutions. Both one is a hub for air mobility and aerospace companies, and the other one is one that actually works with providing drones and other kinds of services for advanced air mobility. And he is the only local person here today. The others have all flown in or are coming in by Zoom. I also then have the pleasure of introducing Scott Drew, UAS Project Manager at ATA LLC. His work is tremendous in terms of what he's done for the air traffic management system, both the VA fix and CA fix, and he'll tell you about that. And then we have coming to us remotely Imran Aukhil, and Imran is he is a consultant and project lead with HR&A Advisors. And HR&A Advisors has done tremendous work with creating especially university innovation districts, campus innovation districts, but also he's done a lot of work in the Southeast in setting up innovation and real estate plays that allow the location of really the location of innovation. So with that, what I'm going to do is give each one of them the opportunity to speak to you for 5 minutes on their expertise and what they have done and how that relates to the attempt to build a Central Coast advanced air mobility corridor. And I'm going to start with Imran, who is coming to us remotely. So Imran, you have 5 minutes, and you can give us your initial presentation. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me on Zoom. I'm sorry I was not able to join you in person. I have to admit this is a little jarring because I see the stage and I see myself as a giant head behind the panelists. So
it's so
I will
big.
do my
Your head
best
is
not
so
to be
big,
distracted
Imran.
by that. Yeah. I have a few slides. I'm going to pull up my screen here and walk you through some initial thoughts. HR&A Advisors is a consulting firm. As you heard, we help create more equitable, resilient, and dynamic communities. We've done this work for clients both on the public and private side across the country and really now the world. You'll see in this list a lot of universities. We love working with universities because they tend to be really exciting clusters of research and innovation that lead to important place-based investment. So when we do our work, we start by identifying innovation assets. Innovation ecosystems are comprised of three key assets, and those are program, place, and people. So you'll see here in these buckets that program references partnerships, financing tools, things like governance and identity and incentives and so on. But it also, in the case of a university-anchored innovation ecosystem, references the research that's happening, the areas of focus that a university may be leading. Place, of course, is the physical place that, that drives innovation, the public and private realm, streets, infrastructure, transit. And then lastly, but perhaps most importantly, is the people, the talent, workforce, but also the quality of life, the places that these people live and spend their time when they're not innovating. So innovation ecosystems need to lead with program. Innovation ecosystems are program driven, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but universities often have an abundance of programmatic assets that can set the direction of the ecosystem. They provide students, faculty, and research infrastructure, to name a few key assets. And the reason all of those are important is that the students are the workforce and the talent pipeline of tomorrow. Anywhere you go, and you know, you heard a little bit about the Bay Area and Silicon Valley in the introduction, but here where I'm based in the Raleigh-Durham region of North Carolina, and even Route 128 for all of its struggles, the Boston metro area, all of these places have a cluster of talent coming out of institutions that is then flowing into the industries that are in those regions. Faculty who pursue translational research, they are a major backbone of research ecosystems and innovation. And their research can lead to commercialization and new ideas in partnership with industry. And lastly, universities often own and operate a lot of research infrastructure. That's not just buildings, but it's also equipment. It's also patents. It's also the kinds of elements that drive innovation that are essential to making something commercializable and financially viable. So when investing in or unlocking an innovation ecosystem, you want to invest in place-based investments, but those alone are not sufficient. You need to have places that are programmatically focused. And when I say that, I mean that oftentimes, when we do work, we go to a place and a university or a client will say, well, let's start with buildings. Of course, you need buildings to house people, you need buildings to house the research and the programming, but you don't want to just build buildings and assume everything else will fall into place. You really need to have programming and collaboration at the top of mind when crafting that physical place. Whatever the programmatic focus of that innovation ecosystem might be, in many of your cases, that's some kind of a drone or air mobility technology, you want to make sure that the program and the resources that drive the research are a consideration in shaping the real estate. It's important to have really robust governance. Governance provides clarity of leadership, decision-making, and resource alignment. Key roles of a successful governance structure include keeping the vision and focus of the project, providing a clear hierarchy to settle conflicts and allow for efficiency, and critical, this is really, really important, in leveraging and partnering with local industry research and capital partners. As you all can probably understand, universities and industry and government all have different incentives, all have different goals and metrics. And having a robust governance structure allows for those different perspectives and metrics to be reconciled. I pulled up a couple of examples of very different innovation ecosystems to help you all see the different kinds of outcomes that are possible. Here in the North Carolina region, there is NC State Centennial Campus, a university-led innovation ecosystem. Also close by is the American Tobacco Campus, a private developer-led ecosystem. And then in the St. Louis metro area is Cortex, a now globally renowned life sciences cluster. Each of these approached their projects very differently, and they each have been successful in their own ways. Centennial Campus is entirely university-led with private partners on campus, both capital partners building buildings, but also private companies and partners innovating with the university to drive new research in very specific areas. The American Tobacco Complex was led by a developer who partnered with a local university to draw them as a tenant and then use their research to attract other industry partners. And then Cortex was actually a collaboration between a number of university and institutional agencies that came together to create a nonprofit and co-invest in a community that, that has now attracted numerous industry partners in research and universities, and now they've got startup hubs and lab spaces. It's really quite dynamic. Innovation ecosystems have the power to create new markets and industries, but they typically take time to mature. Very frequently we are asked about, well, how long does this take? Can you start putting people on the ground, say on the central coast of California, and have a Silicon Valley outcome in 5 years or 10 years? And our response is really that metrics of success should be stakeholder driven and reflect each individual context, but by and large, building robust ecosystems often takes a long time, not measured in weeks or months, perhaps not even in years in some cases, but in decades. RTP, for example, here in the Triangle was built over a 60-year period. There are different metrics that you may use in an innovation ecosystem considering the long-term nature of these projects. Venture capital is one, workforce development is another, the number of patents developed in that ecosystem may be useful, and of course, physical space that is the byproduct of capital investment. And to give you an example, this is Research Triangle Park. It's one of the most renowned innovation ecosystems, not just because of what's there today, but because it was established in what might be described as the middle of nowhere back in the 60s, the central part of North Carolina, which was not a robust economy, but it was anchored by the major research institutions in the region. And as you can see, over a period of nearly 60 years, the universities came together with industry to develop many, many millions of square feet of space and attract major corporations and entrepreneurs and innovators, and now has become a hub of research and development. So I'll conclude with the major steps that we talked about: identify innovation assets, lead with program, invest in places that support that program, establish strong governance, and create near and long-term metrics that reflect the timeline necessary to be successful.
Thanks, Imran. Thanks for that very informative and incisive presentation. Now, Dan, your turn, so shoot.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you prefer if I went to the podium? Excellent. So thanks for having me today. And as Shyam mentioned at the outset, my name is Daniel Plaisance. I run the UAS and AAM portfolio at an organization called Tulsa Innovation Labs. And I think it's fitting to be talking and speaking today after Imran, because really what we do is a case study, a single example of the kind of work and ecosystem development work that he was discussing, but in a single place in this time period, which I think is particularly unique for a few reasons that I'll discuss, and also within this industry with UAS and AAM. So a little bit of background, Tulsa Innovation Labs, we're a nonprofit organization that was spun out of a large local philanthropy in the Tulsa region with the explicit goal of diversifying our regional economy away from its very, very highly concentrated past in oil and gas, energy, and manufacturing into more resilient, high growth niches and industries. And in order to do that, we conducted a really robust research project at the outset, looking at about 180 different industries to identify the ones that were the highest potential for Tulsa. So which industries are actually feasible for us to start to capture, are high growth and resilient enough to really make a long-term economic and sustained economic benefit for our city and our region, and also contestable enough. Not something that's dominated by any particular local area, not something where we're going to be chasing, a small segment of market share, but something where we really have a right to win and can compete. We identified 4 top areas out of those 180 or so. This was in late 2019. One was virtual health that obviously has exploded in the time since then. Cyber, energy tech, and advanced air mobility. And the real reasons behind this were asset-based. So let me take advanced air mobility for a moment and talk about why we saw that as a top opportunity for our region. So a little bit of history for Tulsa. Behind energy, our largest industry is aviation and aerospace. That includes the largest commercial MRO facility in the world at Tulsa International Airport as an American Airlines facility. There are 15,000 people in MRO just within the Tulsa region. There are 130,000 people employed in aerospace and aviation in the state of Oklahoma. So we have the kind of legacy industry on which to build here. We also looking at some of the expertise to really drive innovation and expand the segments of this industry that we're able to capture beyond just production and maintenance and repair, and actually to invention, innovation, research and development, and testing. We have strong university expertise within the state. Particularly, we work closely with Oklahoma State University and the Unmanned Systems Research Institute there, which is among the top institutes in the country for research within this area. And finally, if you look at our incumbent industries, we have the customer base and local use cases. So if you think about large industries that are farther along in the adoption of drones or small UAS at the moment, a lot of them are agriculture, energy, transportation, and logistics. And these are things that our region really excels in and has a high concentration in. So from where we sit, we have incumbent workforce that will need to be upskilled and reskilled, but is most of the way there. We have top-level research and R&D, and then we have the customers that will enable these industries and these young companies to grow and thrive within our region. And over to what Imran was saying before, and it looks like the font got a little messed up here, but we really looked at 5 areas that were critical, we thought, initially to developing this. And let me just say that after launching in late 2019 with these 4 areas, we spent about the next 18 months developing a strategy and partnerships before ever making an investment in this area, a programmatic investment in this area. But the 5 areas that we really looked at, the first is creating innovation pipelines, so that's R&D and testing infrastructure, like Imran was saying. The second was developing and attracting a workforce, reskilling and upskilling incumbent workers, but also setting up the program to bring new generations and new populations into this field, engaging and attracting some of the large employers in addition to the more nimble and innovative scaling companies, growth stage companies, attracting investment capital, which is not always easy to come by in the Great Plains, in the heartlands, and places like Tulsa. So that certainly takes some work. And then building a community around this that enables the exchange of ideas and the growth and scale and real sense of place that's necessary to keep these companies close to home. Luckily, that 18 months of strategic development culminated in July 2021, which is the same month that the Build Back Better Regional Challenge was announced. This was a Department of Commerce grant opportunity from the Economic Development Administration that was essentially the largest place-based investment in the history of the United States. So it's a real shift in industrial policy, looking at how can we incentivize the growth of industries in places that have traditionally been left behind by the innovation economy, by the tech economy. And it asked regions to develop and identify where their right to win industries were, the programs and marginal investments that were needed to make that a possibility, and then propose those projects and fund a cluster of them at once. So not piecemeal, but really a wholesale strategy here. We joked as we were waiting for the result of this grant that the real grant was the friends we make along the way, which I can say certainly is true. And really what we've seen coming out of this, and something that I would urge as a takeaway, is that the upfront in time that we invested in developing this strategy, in bringing stakeholders on board, in engaging our corporate community, our academic community, our public sector, really paid dividends in terms of being able to nimbly adapt and put in a successful application together, and then to implement it. So in the short 18 months since then, we've gone from people saying, you know, drones, thinking of them purely as something you use for wedding photography and to fly over the Grand Canyon and take videos, to you know, our mayor and heads of Chamber of Commerce and school teachers and university presidents using terms like BVLOS, terms like vertiports, and really thinking about this as a real cornerstone of the future of the city. So with an interest of time, I'm going to wrap up in just a moment, but want to take a moment and really highlight just a few of the projects we've been working on. So if you think back to that circular visual that I showed earlier, and really where we see need for some of this development, the projects that we were able to develop and have funded track very closely to that initial strategy. So we are, as of January 1st, setting up a Beyond Visual Line of Sight corridor, an expanded R&D center that focused on tasked research from industry, IP agreements that are favorable to the private sector, really putting the academic expertise at work to service and help grow and expand this economy and opportunity, and then certification and training programs to ensure that this is being translated into true sustained economic opportunity and a community development program for the entire region. So with that, I'll pause. Happy to answer any questions in the question session or later this week. Thank you.
Chris, your turn. Feel free to walk up or as you wish.
Is that on? Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here and give you a little background on what we've been up to. So as opposed to Imran and Daniel, I've kind of taken a little different path from, it's not kind of a top approach. We're coming from the bottom and coming up. And kind of my experience has mainly been in the drone space and doing startups in drone technologies, and having a place to do that was super, super important. This is a picture of the Monterey Bay, the northern part of the Monterey Bay with Santa Cruz at the top. And then our location, where we're located, is at the very bottom at 450 McQuaid on the Monterey Bay Academy campus. And so we started out in Santa Cruz doing drone innovations, but oftentimes there was a lot of pushback by people that were frustrated with us, thinking that we were taking pictures of them, or there was just a lot of angst around drone operations. And I was introduced to the Monterey Bay Academy, which is a 300-acre property that's right on the coast. And ironically, it had a certified airstrip located on the property. So what we found out through that experience, that having this FAA designation is really important for doing more work with the FAA and other institutions, in that it was a designated landing strip. And so we get a lot of visits by STOL aircraft, which is short takeoff and landing aircraft that fly at slower speeds and can land in short areas. And then also the ability to be on the campus, the Monterey Bay Academy campus, was really important, because they have a high school boarding school there with an aviation program and STEM education program. So this is a way to get students involved in various aspects of aviation and robotics. So the proximity to the water is a big value for us, in that we can fly out over the Monterey Bay with having less complicated airspace and less chance of hitting things. And the FAA really likes that, because they don't want to have any conflicts, air-to-air or even people or things on the ground. And then we're also centrally located with a lot of university systems, University of California, Santa Cruz, Cal State University, Monterey Bay here, but also high schools and community colleges. The Naval Postgraduate School is just right in Monterey. And then there's a lot of exciting opportunities into addition what we were doing with my startup company, which was inspecting wind turbine rotor blades, in that we could also work in agriculture, marine science, mobility, energy, security, and then more recently through a collaboration with the Naval Research Lab, we have a meteorological station that is on the site there as well, which plays an important part in aviation, but other types of meteorological investigations. Proximity to Silicon Valley is super important without having to go over the hill and combat all the traffic. Moving in that direction is great. And then just the quality of life of living on the Central Coast. So, you know, coastal mountains and the Monterey Bay. So this is a up-close look, looking straight down on the grass airfield. You can see the coast right there. So access to the beach and the Monterey Bay. Called out the Naval Research Lab's coastal meteorological site, which is just right adjacent to the grass airfield. And then the ramp where the planes park and we can do activities there. And then there's other types of companies that exist on this campus as well. Calfee Design, they make carbon fiber bicycles and have more recently gotten into electric aviation. So it's kind of a little community of really fascinating companies that are somewhat working together to do really exciting things in this region. And we definitely want to be one of the nodes of what else is possible in the region. And then I'm just sharing this picture with you because I know that firefighting came up a lot, and I really see that this is one of the areas that's going to be really super important for coordination of a lot of different things in the airspace. And actually, we're working with the FAA and NASA right now on a program which we're coordinating to ultimately work in firefighting. So if you can imagine that all these things are happening around a fire, but we need to have temporary flight restriction areas over the fire. But aviation has to get from a non-flight restricted area into a flight restricted area. For picking up water or doing different types of surveys. So this coordination and orchestration is super important to be testing out, and we're going to be doing a lot of that down at our facility and offshore, but then that will slowly be creeping back to being in land areas and, I think in a short period of time in firefighting, as this picture demonstrates. So thank you very much, and looking forward to further conversation.
Thanks, Chris. Drew, last but not the least.
Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, everybody. I'm glad to be here. My name is Scott Drew. I'm the UAS project manager at a company called ATA. We're located in Northern Virginia, so I've really loved all the local Californians talking about this cold weather because I'm absolutely loving it right now. All right, so what is a flight information exchange? I'm here because we're standing up the Central Coast California Flight Information Exchange. A lot of the conversation today has been around what it's going to take to get AAM to be viable. Our view is that information needs to be available and operations need to be visible. And so a flight information exchange is a program for state, local government, universities, and public safety agencies to share that information for both each other as well as drone operators, both on the recreation as well as commercial and official side, or I guess public side, government side. So the key to the approach of a flight information exchange is that data is a public asset. It's searchable and available programmatically for public-private partnerships with commercial industry. It fills in the gaps between the ground and the existing aviation data that the FAA, of course, has oversight over. The idea is to inform drone operators of the ground rules and conditions, as well as any local issues and events, public safety incidents, hazards, and sensitive and critical infrastructure. So this enables information sharing in the most open way possible, while also respecting operational security, privacy requirements, and public safety. And there's multiple ways to connect and share that information. The system is tech vendor agnostic, and we do the plumbing work of the UAV industry. We are working with localities to identify and ingest data into a data exchange that is essentially a clearinghouse. Being a private company, we do not own that data. That data belongs to the locality. In Virginia, we stood up the Virginia Flight Information Exchange, and it is the authoritative supplemental data service provider for the Commonwealth. I'm going to skip ahead here. So where does Flight Information Exchange fit in the FAA vision? Well, the FAA has infrastructure and programs in place to build unmanned aircraft system traffic management and urban air mobility. Our system, which is backed by technology we developed called AirDex, is based upon the FAA and NASA concept of operations in this space. State, local governments, and universities are the logical authoritative source for governance and for provisioning of authoritative SDSPs. So we like to say that while it's a struggle to make sure that data is accurate and correct, at the very least, it is authoritative. And we take it upon ourselves to do that plumbing work in this industry to bring that all together. So, as said, we provide a centralized clearinghouse for ground space and UAV relevant information from local government, universities, et cetera. And again, data is a public asset. This is for both the public as well as everyone else operating in this space. It is all aviation. So forgive me, I'm not a graphic designer, but here's the basic concept of how this exchange or clearinghouse would work. And so you see the CC fix in the center. Planning, zoning, public safety, pilots and operators, industry service providers, manufacturers, airports, all of this information needs to be brought together and be made visible and then disseminated throughout the industry so that the operations can be safe and that the industry can grow. And all of that needs to be under a system of governance. So the implementation of the CC fix governance requires 4 components, and we found this out through our work in Virginia. So ultimately, it is all based on stakeholder engagement, which is being conducted by UCSC, Monterey Bay DART, and is embodied in the CC Fix user group. Now, in Virginia, we started with about 8 agencies, the Virginia Department of Emergency Management being one, so we had the public safety component. The Department of Aviation in Virginia is not under the DOT, so we had both the Department of Aviation and Department of Transportation. And we brought these folks together to meet and discuss what was needed, because Virginia wanted to be a place where drone industry could take off, pun intended. But they didn't want to put all their eggs in one basket. They didn't want to sign up with a single vendor that promised they would be the UTM solution of the future. So instead, they decided to opt to go in this exchange model. And what that basically brought us to was this governance model. So we document policies, decisions, and we embody all of that in the user group minutes and documentation in support of the system. And then the FIX, the Flight Information Exchange, is the system of record for all of this information and data. User group meetings and process and policy identification and creation is all done from the beginning of the system, as well as through its different iterations and as it grows. And so this governance is vested. But the idea is to map specific data sets to use cases and advisory types. We started with 8 agencies in Virginia. We're up to about 55 in the system now. We have 150 credentialed users. We have over 20,000 advisories that have already gone through, bridging this gap between the ground and what the FAA is looking at as regulating the airspace. Now, this isn't regulatory information. This is informational. This is just for awareness. But that can change, and that probably will change to some extent as this industry moves forward. Go forward a little bit here, just keep an eye on time. So what type of data assets and integration can support this type of community readiness? And how has it grown? How have we seen it in Virginia? How do we see it going in other locations throughout the country? So we need to be sure to represent ground space configuration data, hazards, obstacles, obstructions, public safety data, takeoff and landing area rules, sensitive infrastructure, hazardous ground conditions. But the other thing that we're also doing is integrating sensor feeds. And these sensor feeds, like I said before, are tech vendor agnostic. So we've got environmental sensors, flood sensors, ADS-B feeds in the system. All of that feeding in and creating advisories that are relevant for your safe UAV operations. And then surveillance information, as we move forward, we're looking at how can we incorporate data flowing both ways so that we have live operational visibility in the system as well as key information going out from the system. Virginia has partnered with 6 of the USSs out of, I think, the 14 remaining in the country that the FAA has accredited for LANCE submission. Now, this is how UAV pilots can submit flight plans to the FAA for approval, further coordination, or denial. But these 6 USSs are pulling our data from the ASDSP, that is the Virginia Flight Information Exchange, and passing that on to their users. And this all started from the ground up, organically engaging a handful of organizations, admittedly through state coordination, but it has spread by word of mouth and on-the-ground engagement. So, the plumbing. And that's it. That's all I've got. So, back to you.
Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much. That was fascinating in terms of the area you folks covered. Getting sustained investment, innovation, and technology renewal becomes the key for creating an innovation district. And you've alluded, all of you, to some of the key elements. One element that'll become key for the Central Coast Advanced Air Mobility, Robotics, and Automation corridor will be public policy. While all of you have referred to it, I'd like you to take a moment, and I'll start with Imran, for the importance of that and the specific things that can be done or that you would expect for public policy to do to make the corridor a reality. Imran?
Yeah, that's a great question. Policy is one of the 3 or 4 stool legs, I guess, that make innovation feasible. Regulation is necessary and important, but sometimes regulation can also hamper innovation. So where we see innovation really flourishing across at least the United States, but even beyond now, is places where regulation is designed with innovation in mind. And with, in particular, when you talk about drone technology, for example, regulation is very, very important. Safety and well-being of the users and the various stakeholders in the community. But sometimes regulation can get in the way. So I think it's important for policymakers to understand the types of regulation that are important, and times when policy needs to be flexible and accommodating. I know in California, for example, development has some complexity and some limitation, but I think that starting there might be an important place for the Central Coast to explore. You have housing shortages, you have very high cost of living challenges there that might be difficult for talent. So I think addressing the pipeline of new development through policy is probably a really important starting point.
Thanks. Thank you for that. Can you hear me? Thank you for that. But Dan, if you're looking at public policy, you've been involved with this, and if you look at the elements that you need to get a innovation district going, it involves the local level, it involves the county level, it involves the regional level, the state level. And so what are the things that policymakers can do to facilitate the establishment of a district in terms of the specific kinds of things you've done, besides funding, which congratulations, that was amazing. So, okay.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there are a couple of categories here, I guess, right? One is the regulation specifically to create a favorable environment for the growth of an industry. That gets down to everything from tax policies and business growth incentives. But then also for this particular industry, making it clear that in Tulsa and in Oklahoma, for instance, we're going to do everything we can to make this a favorable environment to test and to grow your business in this particular region. So we were named earlier this year as the first in readiness for drone commerce among the 50 states. And a lot of that was based on the work of state policy boards that were formed about 5 or 6 years ago. I sit on one that basically allowed a lot of the people who were really deep in this to pick their heads up, work together, and form a perspective on behalf of the local communities, the university communities, and the private sector on what some tangible steps were that we would be able to take. So that's one thing that I'll say. And then in terms of specific geographic innovation districts, I mean, there are, I think, I've been actually pretty inspired by some of the work going on here at the Dunes that I've been able to learn about in the last 24 hours that I've been here. But I think having some sort of centralization, or at the very least coordination, governance, as Imran put it earlier, is absolutely essential from the get-go, and including in that some sort of land use policy, architecture, zoning, sort of real estate development component to that, in addition to the technical pieces as well, I think is really critical.
Chris, any thoughts?
Well, just having a space to do things, I think, is really super important. Maker spaces or open areas that are safe places to test drones with some supervision and oversight is super, super critical. Working within the regulatory framework is key. So at our location, Parallel Flight is located there, so they have the ability to go out and test under their COA. But also just to ensure that everything is safe in the area that they're operating on the site, and things that support them as much as possible. But also having a favorable place that Parallel Flight's employees like coming to work too is really important. You know, some of them are surfers and they show up, and you know, having a place for them to take a shower, you know, is really super important, so they can go straight from surfing to working. And so some of those small things count, you know, in having an ecosystem.
Terrific.
That is such a California use case right there.
Yeah, that's right. So, Drew, from the point of view of data and from the point of view of the fixed
Sure.
systems, what's the kind of stuff you've run into?
Sure, yeah. No, I like this question because it essentially encapsulates a large element of what an information exchange really is meant to do, which is to represent that policy and that regulatory framework as a geotemporal advisory in a system, and then disseminate that to all parties that need that information. One thing I neglected to say was that the Central California Coast Fix is live right now. You can go to cc-fix.com if you'd like. We're still ingesting data and getting that information in there, but it's publicly searchable within the restrictions of the sensitivity of that data.
And having two first names, both your first name and your second name.
Oh, I have four.
I can choose any.
My
right?
first two names
So
are Matthew
Scott,
Joseph. So
Scott, thank you.
Have
Thank
at
you, Scott.
it, yeah.
I'll call you Drew occasionally.
That's,
okay?
I'm used to it.
All right. So as far as the assessment, so this is a different direction. As far as the assessment piece that you talked about, and the piece about the process, what are your lessons for the Central California AMBRA corridor that you think you can take from the Tulsa experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think what I would say first is to be disciplined, but also be flexible, right? So when we first looked at the use cases of industries, the strongest standout for the UAS and AAM industry was energy use cases because of the major energy corporates and especially midstream oil and gas corporates in our region, right? So we saw this as a way initially to both develop and cultivate a new industry while also increasing the economic competitiveness of our legacy industries as they compete with national and international firms. That has it seems like a lifetime ago in terms of our actual focus on that, but sticking to what the data says and what the data shows as this industry has expanded has really enabled us to be in a good position to capture a lot of the extra growth of this. What I'd say as well is this industry is going to be very large, as I think today has probably convinced most of you if you weren't convinced already. And it's likely to have a few hubs, and it's likely that there will be a few places that specialize in certain segments of this industry. Where we sit, energy use cases and agriculture use cases, yes, but also logistics and last mile delivery use cases are really where we think we can thrive based on a whole set of aspects that I can get into further if anyone's interested. Obviously, in the Central Coast with Joby and with that existing in your backyard, there's a great place to start. But really thinking about what are the segments and niches within this industry that you can really build and differentiate a brand in and start to develop a real competitive advantage and right to win, even at the level below UAS and AAM. And from there, success will follow probably, and the target will change as time goes on. But I think that would be a helpful piece of advice were we to start our process now.
Thank you. Imran.
Really successful projects anywhere in the world have champions behind them. In your region, you've got one here with DART as an organizer of this incredible symposium. But I think that for your region to continue to grow this industry, there are a lot of competing forces, competing priorities, the environment, economics, policy, as we talked about earlier. The champion, whoever that individual organization or group of people might be, I think really needs to help not just set a vision, but communicate that vision to all of the players in the market and in policymaking world and beyond, really. I think that sometimes, there's a book, by the way, I recommend at this point called The Innovators by Walter Isaacson. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend everybody do, because it's a biography of the computer, but really what it is a biography of all of the champions along the way that helped the computer become a reality. And I think that's going to be true in Central California and with this industry. You really want to have those champions leading the way, connecting the different resources, and helping the policy and investment materialize.
Great. Chris, I know you and I are both organic process guys. So what is it in the organic process that can help this corridor grow?
Well, from my perspective, it's just taking on startup companies and supporting startup companies, but at the same time engaging with the youth in our region, I think is really super important. So getting people excited about what's out there in the real world. And so that could be Joby Aviation, it's what Parallel Flight is doing. It could be, we've talked about it a bunch and haven't quite executed on it yet, but it could be drone racing. So something that engages with the youth so they could really start seeing what the possibilities are in this area. But also, I think airspace management is another really exciting thing. I have an ADSB app on my phone, and I'm always comparing plane contrails that I see flying over and like, where are they going? And what elevation are they at? So, I mean, that could just be me, but I'm sure there's other people or kids that are curious about these things, but they just have to know, how do these things work together? And so, yeah, those are the type of organic things that I think are really exciting in any innovation or region to get people excited about. So, yeah.
Fabulous, yeah. And Drew, he sort of led it your way with the air management system. What do you think are the possibilities to get that established supplier networks? How do you build the data capabilities? That kind of
Engagement.
thing. Engagement?
You need to just get out there and talk to the data stewards, ferret it out, ingest it, and get it to the people that need it.
Okay, thanks. So getting to the question of the companies that are going to be in this cluster, I think, Chris, you've had experience with your hub. You and I have talked about that. What are the kinds of things that will need to happen for us to get the critical mass of companies? And earlier you were referring to an anchor firm. We have an anchor firm in Joby, but you need in the other pieces around Joby anchor firms. So what would you do to make that happen, or what do you see as, or what could happen here, Chris?
Well, part of that I see is just working within that regulatory framework, so getting more of the FAA and NASA involved. And so we're currently working on what is known as the COSTA project, which is cross-cutting operations strategy and technical assessment. So this is kind of bringing in airspace management, which we're working together with ATA on. They're part of the process. Using our airstrip as a facility, but having multiple aircraft flying around at the same time and orchestrating them, and taking those steps to ensure that everything's done safely. So actually today and tomorrow over at NASA Ames, we're doing the tabletop discussions for all this, and then that will culminate in live flights, so it will happen in April. So it's really exciting to see what can come out of that, because that's one of the first steps, I feel, in definitely attracting more people to engage in these ecosystems.
Terrific. Drew, your thoughts?
Could you repeat the question?
So the question was with regard to attracting companies to this cluster. You've been involved with Virginia,
Sure.
and clearly you've worked with lots of companies.
Yeah, no,
partnering.
absolutely.
So it's both a partnering question, but also an attraction question.
Okay. Yeah, I can talk to that a little bit. Something we did, and forgive me for talking about Virginia, something we did in Virginia was...
We'll forgive you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Was the Apple Blossom Fly-In. Now, every year for the past 91 years, there's been a Shenandoah Apple Blossom Festival in Winchester, Virginia. Well, this year, or this past April, we did the fly-in, and about 30,000 people attend the festival. It's roughly a little over 1 square mile. In that time, we managed to safely operate, I think, 41 UAV flights that represented commercial operations. Drone Up was delivering ribs and chicken barbecue and barbecue. AMA, the local AMA hobbyist chapter, was flying fixed-wing RC aircraft adjacent to this. And I think we had 6 or 7 locations where public safety was operating overflight and overwatch for the whole festival, so 41 different flights. And we did that using our system to aggregate all of this information. And in addition to the flight information being posted by the pilots and having a safety grid laid out and having spotters on the ground, we had a radar system set up that was feeding live data in for drones and also some birds. It's a tough problem. And then also the local ADS-B feeds from sensors at the local General Aviation Airport. And in all of that, you heard me mention Drone Up, public safety. You know, we had a lot of interest from other companies saying, wait, you can do this now. You know, we haven't cracked that BV lost nut yet, but we're still showing that, you know, even though that's not there, it's not, the last mile delivery component is not completely there, you know, we're showing that we can operate safely with what's structured right now, so as long as information is available, and companies are very interested to allow us to do that work for them so they can focus on their main commercial endeavors.
Terrific. You know, you alluded to this very much in your presentation. You've got experience. How do you get the critical mass of companies in? Give us some specifics.
Yeah, I'd probably answer it slightly differently, because I think that part of what's really exciting about this industry is it's ripe for entrepreneurship. So it's not just about actually attracting companies, but it's really an opportunity and a more genuine opportunity than most others, I think, even within technology, for new entrepreneurs or people with experience in the automotive sector, in component manufacturing, in engineering and the academic world, to actually start and launch these companies and have a widespread economic impact and technical impact on how this takes off. I mean, I think that we're at an interesting place now, and don't want to editorialize too much, but if you compare, for instance, the OEMs in this market to the mature OEMs in the Boeings and Airbuses of the world, or the ground automation market, they're much more vertically integrated. And I think as things move along and as things mature, those supply chains are likely to get a lot more segmented, and firms will need to specialize on what they do best. And I think we're a few years away from that, but I do think that the time is now to start looking where those opportunities, whether it's hardware components, whether it's software components, whether it's cybersecurity and data management components, whether it's the infrastructure that's going to underlie this, data infrastructure or physical infrastructure. I think there are a myriad of opportunities here for firms to emerge and grow and really succeed here. And I would say that the sort of policy and programs that should be encouraged in this space are less around attracting companies and bringing companies from somewhere else in, and more about cultivating the talent, the drive, and the supportive services, as Chris was talking about a little bit earlier, to commercialize tech that exists at universities, to make sure that people see themselves as entrepreneurs and really see the opportunities here. So I think that I would, based on where this market sits right now and where I think it's going, I would focus there.
Thanks. And Imran, since you were nodding your head and he covered so much ground, I'll give you a minute to add what you think is critical to do that.
I think Dan hit it on the head. The only thing I want to add is that talent pipeline is essential to attracting anything, entrepreneurship, as Dan suggested, or companies who are looking for a place to go and, land their businesses. I think this region, the Central Coast, has people, but it's unclear exactly where the talent will come from to allow these companies, including the major anchors in the region like Joby, to grow. So I think the local universities, coming back to the earlier question on policy, need to start thinking about their own policies in shaping a talent pipeline that is industry oriented and will respond to the needs of this particular industry.
Thanks for focusing on the talent issue. I feel really close to that one. So we've got 4 minutes left. So a minute for each one of you to your call to action and the opportunity for the Central Coast AMRA cluster. Why don't we start with you, Drew? Go ahead.
My call to action?
Yeah.
I'll go back to engagement. I know a lot of folks here are in the policy realm, and also here and curious about what's going to happen in the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. This is the shaping period. You've got big companies out there with agendas, but you also have the ability to say, well, this is how we want our communities to interact with this type of commercial operation, or this type of regulatory framework. Because the sooner you can get in and start solving these problems and having these conversations, the better.
Imran.
I think universities have a really important role in this region. I think they provide talent, but they also provide the research infrastructure, the faculty. They just fill so many of the important needs for this region. And I think the local institutions really need to position themselves to take a leadership role and perhaps collaborate in providing a local focused economic development strategy.
Thank you. Chris.
Yeah, and the universities and also including the Naval Postgraduate School and other folks that are in the Department of Defense, because there's a lot of new innovations that are happening in those areas as well that really deserve to be tested and figured out. So I think that it's a large area that we need to cover, but having a place to do that and a structure to do it is really super important. Without that, everybody's kind of trying to do stuff below the radar or do things in their backyard. After a while, that just doesn't make sense, but also I think there's a sense of collaborating with others that are doing similar things. You know, I think that there's a lot to be learned from each other, and we don't need to figure it all out ourselves. But having a place to do that, I think, is really super, super important.
Terrific. And to you, Dan.
Sure. The final thing I would say, in addition to a lot of the kind of market factors that are making this a really fascinating and interesting industry to be in, I think there are social factors and larger macroeconomic factors that make this a great time to be thinking about this. So if you look at federal policy, federal industrial policy, from the Build Back Better Regional Challenge to the restructuring of the National Science Foundation and the addition of a Technology Partnerships Directorate there, to the CHIPS and Science Act and the reshoring of certain manufacturing and production and innovation incentives and technologies, the institutions that really made, in a lot of ways, the classic places we think of as innovation hubs that made them that way, they're looking for the underdogs. They're looking for the Tulsas, for the Central Coasts, for the places that haven't fully captured that benefit in the last 40 or 50 years. And they're looking to North Carolina and the Research Triangle Parks as an example of really what can happen across all segments of society when collaboration and investment really meets the moment. And I think that this industry in this moment and the group of people gathered here and the institutions that exist make this a really compelling moment for the Central Coast in this industry and in this space in particular.
And in the 20 seconds I've got left, thank you very much. Give me one word answer, lightning round. What is the most likely failure factor? One word answer or 3 words at maximum? What's likely to cause the failure of such a thing from starting? Any thoughts?
I would say some type of stupid mistake in the way of a drone manned aircraft interaction that would point a finger at the industry saying, you know, there's a big problem that wasn't thought out. So I think that safety aspect is super important.
Yeah, same. It boils down to safe operations, safety.
Terrific. How about you from a...
Public acceptance.
That's a good one.
You?
Nothing kills innovation like a lack of collaboration. So collaboration is essential here.
Well, thank you very much, all of you, for a terrific session. Please give them a hand. Thank you very much.